is whether there's an obligation to mention Al Anisim in the Birkat Hamazon. And we pointed out why should davening, why should Birkat Hamazon be different than davening, right? The Gemara does not have a question whether you need to say Al Anisim in davening, right? And Midah. And we explained Rashi and Tosfot had different opinions. That Rashi says when they designated Hanukkah, one of the basic designations was that you should go ahead and say Al Anisim in the davening. That was part of. Oh, look who's here! Morning, Sol. Welcome back. So the Gemara is the Gemara right there, and we have right up in the corner of it. Right, there um, was a basic part of the enactment of Hanukkah, right? For Hanukkah, they said that you got to go ahead and light candles. You got to go ahead and read say Hallel, and also they enacted that you should go ahead and say Al Anisim in the davening. If you recall, the Gemara brought before, bless you, they made these days al Sam Yom Tovim b'Halel b'Hodah, right? That's what it says in Megillah Tanit. They designated these days. These are special days for Hallel and Hodah, praise and thanks. Hanukkah is about praise and thanks. Even in the Al Anisim, so it's about praise and thanks. Now, how do you do the praise and how do you do the thanks? The praise is through what? Is through Hallel. That's the praise. Where is the thanking? Meaning, in America they have how they call Thanksgiving. We have an 8-day Thanksgiving holiday called Hanukkah. How do you like that, Adam? 8 days of Thanksgiving. That was part of the right, Simon. That's the days of Hahodah. How was that expressed? Where do you express that thank you? Right? Where? In the Al Hanisim. But that's the Al Hanisim in davening, praying. Did the rabbis require Al Hanisim in the Birkat Hamazon? You had a nice meal, beautiful. Do you have to go ahead and say Al Hanisim? Now, if you want to say Al Hanisim, the Gemara will say there's no question. It's not called an interruption. You want to say it, you could say it. The question is there an obligation to say it? And that was the Gemara's discussion yesterday. And the commentaries talk about the Gemara is the question about Hanukkah. Yes, our Gemara, we've been focusing on Hanukkah. We're learning Masechah Shabbat. Rabbi, where are we going? Where's Hanukkah? We're learning Shabbat. Because Shabbat, Bar Madlikin opens up about the oils and the wicks on Shabbat. But the Gemara has a discussion. What about the oils and wicks on Hanukkah? So that's how we got into Hanukkah. Because we got into the oils and the wicks. And then once we got into Hanukkah, the Gemara elaborated. There is no specific tractate called Masechtat Hanukkah. And here it's right here. It's mainly here in Masechah Shabbat. So in a certain sense, we're learning Masechah Hanukkah in a certain sense. It's right here. And now, so being that's the case, the Gemara does ask the question, do you mention Al Anisim on Purim in Birkat Hamazon? Right? We know we have Al Anisim at Purim also. And really, if we analyze the Gemara about Hanukkah, we could try to think about Purim, because what was the two sides of the coin regarding Hanukkah? Why you should be obligated to mention Hanukkah in the Birkat Hamazon, and why possibly not? So the Gemara said that Hanukkah is a rabbinic holiday. Maybe because it's a rabbinic holiday, maybe you do not need to, maybe the rabbis did not obligate us to mention it in the Birkat Hamazon, being that it's a rabbinic holiday. Meaning in the davening, that's part of the enactment. To do it, you have to say it in the davening, even though it's a rabbinic holiday. But in the Birkat Hamazon, maybe they didn't obligate us. And what do you say? Because it's Parsumei Nisa. Because Hanukkah there's a very big aspect of Hanukkah that's very unique, that's very special, is the publicizing of the miracle. So, being that's the case, so by saying the Al Anisim, there would be, it's part of publicized talk about the miracle, and publicizing the miracle, and maybe therefore it should be in the Birkat HaMazon. Tosfos points out that maybe that's part of why the difference between Birkat HaMazon and davening. Yes, the Gemara says Birkat HaMazon, you'd be publicizing the miracle, but it's a much less publicized miracle in Birkat HaMazon than in Shul and davening. Because davening, you have a minyan. It's like that's the given, right? We have a minyan when we're davening. It says we have a minyan, so therefore maybe that's why the Gemara has no question about davening. It's davening has a very clear, open, strong publicizing a miracle. But the Chazan says out loud. It's a very big publicizing the miracle. But when it comes to Birkat HaMazon, a lot of times you're doing it in the privacy of your own home. You do Birkat HaMazon. And you might be eating by yourself. When you eat by yourself, you say the Birkat HaMazon. You hear it, but you're saying it to yourself. It's not real. It's a much less publicizing of the miracle. But there is some aspect. We spoke about the fact that yesterday that in the old times, when you had three or more people, when you had a zimun, only the leader would say the Birkat HaMazon. He would say it out loud, just like Kiddush Friday night. You make Kiddush out loud. Everybody doesn't say their own Kiddush generally. One person says a Kiddush for everybody. So too, the zimun, they would have it that the leader would just say the zimun would lead the zimun and would say the whole Birkat HaMazon out loud, and everybody would listen. But today, because it's difficult to focus and listen and concentrate on the whole Birkat HaMazon, I have to listen to someone, and our attention span. By the way, it's not just 2025. It's already a long time already in halacha, hundreds of years.
So he has to have in mind everybody,
and they have to have in mind both sides. He has to have in mind, I'm covering you. You have in mind you want to fulfill your obligation, and you have to pay attention and listen the whole time. Technically, you could do it. But that's how we do it if you have someone who doesn't know how to read, who doesn't know Birkat HaMazon. So really, it would be better, I think, to have that, when you read the English and it comes out Hebrew, what I mean? That would be better. But sometimes we just have one person who just reads it out loud and it covers the people who don't know how to, hard for them to read. So that was the discussion regarding the Birkat HaMazon of Al Anisim, is that clear also? In Birkat HaMazon. And then the Gemara concluded, the Gemara said, you're not obligated to do it, but if you're doing it, at least the opinion the Gemara brought down. Good morning, Rani. The Gemara brought down, you're not obligated. Morning. But if you want to do it, where do you do it? In the bracha of Nodelecha, right? In the Birkat HaMazon, the first bracha is called Birkat Hazon, which concludes with Hazon HaSakol. Maybe starts from Hazon HaOlam. The second bracha is Nodelecha. It's also referred to as Birkat HaAretz. The second bracha of the Birkat HaMazon is referred to the bracha on the land. We focus in on thanking on the land. And the third bracha is called Rachem. It's called the Boni Yerushalayim. It's called Bin Yerushalayim. It's about Yerushalayim. So it's called Boni Yerushalayim. Where is the appropriate place to place the Al Anisim? So that we had one opinion. The Gemara said you're supposed to do it in Nodeh, and that's the halacha in the bracha of thanks. That's why, if you notice, Al Anisim is not in the normal place that we have inserts. We put inserts in the Rachem or an Alan or say, but because Nodeh Lecha is a bracha of thanks and Modim is a bracha of thanks, so therefore Al Anisim, which is the idea of what Thanksgiving, belongs in the blessing. That's the blessing of what of thanks. That's why it's over there, right? So that's the reason for that's what the Gemara says. Then now we're in the next point is Iboilu. Let's go to the Mahu Lahaskir Rosh Chodesh. So let's take a look on 24A1. On the right side. You got it? Iboilu. Mahu Lahaskir 24A1. Mahu Lahaskir Rosh Chodesh B'Birkat HaMazon. Do I have to, the way we're going to learn it, do I mention Rosh Chodesh and Birkat HaMazon? Again, I would say the Gemara's question is, is there an obligation to mention Rosh Chodesh and Birkat Hamazon? Meaning, it shouldn't be a question of, am I allowed to? I mean, really, the Gemara before told us regarding Alanisim and Birkat Hamazon, it says you're not obligated, but if you want to, you could. So the Gemara showed us that it's not called a hefsek, not called an interruption. Even, meaning you could have a concept that's something you're not obligated to do, but if you do it, it's not called an interruption. Just like in the Amidah, let's say the bracha of Parnasah, of Barchenu. I started them called Barchenu today in the summertime. They call it Barchenu, right? I mean, there are certain brachot in them. We say you can add certain supplications within, correct? Yes, there's certain things. Certain Sidurim have certain hiratzon you can put within the Shema Kolenu. That's not called an interruption. You don't have to add certain personal things there, but if you want, let's say the bracha of Refu'enu, of Refuah, there's an insert. I mean, if you want to put a hiratzon, especially say it's for someone specific or something about Refuah. But you don't have the obligation to say that, but if you want to say it, you can say it's not called an interruption. So that's how we can learn also. The question is, am I obligated? Meaning, is this if it's something that I have to do, or what I don't have to do? And we pointed out yesterday, there could be a phenomenon in the morning that there could be something that you have to do, but not necessarily if you don't do it, you have to repeat the item. You know what I'm saying? That's a separate area of discussion, right? Something I got to do, but if I don't do it, for instance, we gave the example, Rosh Chodesh at night. I need to mention Yalav Yavo, Rosh Chodesh and the Amidah. And Yalav Yavo and the Amidah, both the Shachrit, Mincha, Arvit. But there is a law, if I did not mention Yalav Yavo at night in the Amidah, I don't have to repeat the Amidah. Right? If I didn't mention Yalav Yavo and Rosh Chodesh in the day, Shachrit and Mincha, I need to repeat that. But if I didn't mention at night, why? Because the court did not sanctify the new month by nighttime. They only officially announced it in the day. They waited till the daytime, accepted the witnesses by day. They announced it by day. So therefore, the night before, you don't have to. Even now we have the calendar. We know when Rosh Chodesh is. If you didn't say Yalav Yovu in the Amidah by Arvit at night, you do not have to repeat the Amidah. Is that clear? By the way, Chalamoid does not have that allowed. Meaning, Chalamoid, if you don't see Yalav Yovu at night, you have to repeat the Amidah. If you catch yourself before you take the 3 steps back, before you see L'Ratzon Rifi, before you end the Amidah, you can go ahead and go back to Mitzvah. Right? So here we want to know, what about Rosh Chodesh and Birkat Hamazon? Do I have to mention, again, we have to put on our thinking caps, as they say. Remember, we're all after the fact. Remember, we say Yalav Yavo on Rosh Chodesh, Birkat Hamazon. To us, I might look like obvious, but the Gemara has a question about it. Maybe I don't have to. What's the question? Why shouldn't I? Again, the Gemara does not have a question. Should I mention Yalav Yavo in the Amidah? The Gemara doesn't have a question. Do I mention Yalav Yavo on Rosh Chodesh in the Amidah? There's no question about it. So what's the question about Birkat Hamazon? What's the issue? Why should Birkat Hamazon be different? So look what the Gemara says. Now also remember the idea that there's a fundamental difference between Amidah and Birkat Hamazon. Amidah is something that I have an obligation to do Amidah, right? I have every day. I have an obligation. Just like I told someone yesterday, young teenager I was learning with, and he didn't realize that if he misses morning, Ralph.
Morning, Rabbi.
If he misses tefillin one day, he did a sin. I mean, sin is a big word, by the way. We're not just going to whether sin. I mean, he's obligated. It's not like, you do. I put on tefillin, I get a mitzvah. I don't put on tefillin, I don't get the mitzvah. It doesn't work that way. It's not like, if you went to a nursing home to visit someone today, you get a mitzvah. If you didn't go to a nursing home today, you don't get you didn't violate the law. No one's obligating you. Hashem not obligated you to go to a nursing home today. But if you didn't put on tefillin today, you violated an obligation you had. You were obligated to put on tefillin, and you didn't do it. So davening is also an obligation you have to do. But washing and having bread on Rosh Chodesh is not an obligation. It is a mitzvah. I mean, if you go Rosh Chodesh without having a meal, I don't believe you did a sin. you don't get that mitzvah. Meaning you could have done something which would be very appropriate, very respectful, very honorable, but you did not do that. If you didn't do it, okay, we're not, what I'm saying? But you didn't violate, it's not an obligation of the day. Obligation of the day to say Yalaviyavo in the davening. That's something you need to do. That's something we daven you have to daven every day. So part of it, that's something that you have to do. The rabbi said that's where you have to mention Yalaviyavo. But something which is a voluntary type of thing, you're bringing yourself into it, right? You go in and you have bread, which is a beautiful thing. The Shulchan Aruch talks about making it's talked about the idea of having a meal on Rosh Chodesh, and we say the most really the focus be during the daytime more than the nighttime, which might be in sync with the idea that we said before, because the sanctification was by the day. I wonder if that's the reason behind that law. And you have when you have a Sudan Rosh Chodesh, you should try to make it on light day hours. You know what I'm saying? So the Gemara says, what is the law about mentioning Rosh Chodesh Ya'aleh V'yavo in your what? Birkat Hamazon. So do you have to do it or not? That will be the Gemara. Do you have to? Do you have a right to? So what does the Gemara say? So the Gemara says, Iboyelu, Ma'ul Haskir, everybody got it? Ma'ul Haskir Rosh Chodesh, 24A1. Ma'ul Haskir Rosh Chodesh, Birkat Hamazon. Do you mention it in Birkat Hamazon? So, if you're going to tell me Chanukah, which is rabbinic, maybe you're not obligated to mention Al Anisim in the Birkat Hamazon. Even though we said you're not obligated, but if you do it, there's a place to do it. So if you tell me Chanukah is rabbinic and you don't need to do it, so Rosh Chodesh, they're right there, Sarich. So Rosh Chodesh is a biblical concept. Rosh Chodesh is a Torah concept. So then maybe you would have to go ahead and mention it in the Birkat Hamazon. Or do more perhaps, Kiva de lo osu b'asiyat melacha. On Rosh Chodesh, you're allowed to do work. You're allowed to go to work on Rosh Chodesh. Since you're allowed to go to work, therefore maybe it's not that same level of celebratory of Shabbat and Yom Tov, and therefore Shabbat and Yom Tov, the Gemara doesn't have a question about whether you have to mention Shabbat in the Birkat Hamazon or Yom Tov that you have to. It's such a celebratory day, you got to talk about it, right? You got to mention it. You say Birkat Hamazon, you have to mention it. But Rosh Chodesh, which is not that level of celebratory day, that you're allowed to go to work, maybe you don't have to mention. So what does the Gemara say? Rav Amma Maskir. Rav says you need to mention Rosh Chodesh in the Birkat Hamazon. Rav Chanina Amma Eina Maskir. Rav Chanina says you do not need to mention Rosh Chodesh in the what? In the Birkat Hamazon. I don't know if I said hello to Ralph, proper hello to Ralph. Good to see you, Ralph.
Yeah.
So the Gemara says, Omer Rav Zvika. Rav Zvika said, Nakot the Rav biyadech. Take the opinion of Rav. That Rav says you have to do it. You should follow that opinion. Why? Dekoi Rav Ushia Kavatei. Rav Ushia is in agreement with him. So he has Rav Ushia with him. So we have and Rav Ushia is quoting a Braita, early opinion. So we have line up the men, so to speak. We got somebody, a big Torah authority that's in sync with Rav. So that if you have a question, who's the winner? So if you have this rabbi who's agreeing with Rav, so let's go with that opinion. Tani Rav Oshia. Rav Oshia says, Yomim sheyish korban musaf. Days that there is a korban musaf. There's the days that have musaf. Remember, Hanukkah, there's no musaf. There's no musaf of Hanukkah. Musaf would only be our prayer of musaf corresponds to musaf. What does the word musaf mean? Musaf means additional, like baltosif, or an add. Or Yosef was called Yosef. What did she say? Yosef li ben acher, right? Yosef Alechem Pomim, or Yosef Ben Ed. So if there's extra offerings in the Beit HaMikdash, when there was extra offerings in the Beit HaMikdash because of the special day, like Yom Tov and Shabbat and Rosh Chodesh, those are the days that we have Musaf. However, Hanukkah, which is a holiday post the Torah being given, there's no Musaf. Therefore, there was no extra korbanot, there's no extra prayer. Morning Asaf. So now he says the following. Days that there's korban musaf. Asaf was discussing Rosh Chodesh, Ya'alav Yavo. Do you have to say it in Birkat HaMazon or not? And Rav says you have to, and Rav Zreika says follow Rav, because Rav Ushia also says you have to mention Ya'alav Yavo in the Birkat HaMazon of Rosh Chodesh, because Yomim She'esh Korban Musaf, days that have Musaf. What are examples of days that have Musaf? Kigon, Rosh Chodesh and Chol Hamoed, right? Because the Chol Hamoed, those intermediate days, they all have extra korbanot, therefore there's Musaf. So those days, Arvit, Shachrit, Mincha, and all the Amidah, you have to mispalel Shmona Esrei, you daven the Shmona Esrei, the Amidah, Shmona Esrei, Ve'omer, and you say me'ein hamura b'avodah. You talk about the day. Today is Chol Hamoed, but today is Rosh Chodesh. You go ahead now. Why didn't it say Kigon Shabbat? Right? It's interesting, right? Because Shabbat also has Musaf. The Shabbat, because the Shabbat, the whole Amidah is different than Shabbat. The whole Amidah is all about Shabbat. I mean, the whole middle bracha is on Shabbat. The whole middle bracha is already about Shabbat. Like, I'm not going to use that as an example that you talk about the day in Avodah. No, Shabbat you don't talk about the day in Avodah. Where do you talk about Shabbat? Where do you talk about Shabbat in the Amidah, in the whole middle blessing? Right? The Shabbat Amidah has 7 blessings. Right? The first 3 are like every other day. The last 3 are like every other day. The last 3 of every day, and the first 3 of every day. The middle blessing of Shabbat is all about Shabbat. In contrast to Chol Hamoed and Rosh Chodesh, where the Shachrit and Mincha and Arvit is the weekday. It's a weekday davening. When you have Musaf, that's different, because that's about the holiday. But there, because it's a weekday davening, that's where I need to tell you, by the way, there's an insert. You got it? You hear that, everybody? I have to tell you about an insert. A Shabbat, I don't have to tell you. Shabbat is an insert, because it's not an insert in Shabbat. It's the whole blessing. So you hear what I'm saying? So, Max, Adam, here where it's clear, Simon. So the Gemara says, so Yomim Sheishrim Korban Musaf, days that there's a Korban Musaf, Kigon Rosh Chodesh Chol Hamoed. So Arvit, Shachrit, Mincha, Mitpalel Shmona Esrei. You pray Shmona Esrei, meaning Shmona Esrei is the 18 brachot. Now we have 19 because they added Lamashinim. It's the regular Midah. Ve'omer me'ein hamura. And you talk about the day, you talk about today is Rosh Chodesh, we talk about today is Chol Hamoed. Where do you talk about it? Where is the insert? Ba'avodah. The bracha, the blessing that's called avodah. What is the bracha that's called avodah? That's the bracha of Ritzei, which we say, V'hashev et avodah. Return the avodah. So it makes sense with that when we're asking for the returning of the avodah, returning of the service of the Beit HaMikdash, it makes sense that we should mention the day of Rosh Chodesh there. Ya'alav Yavo was found there. And we should mention about Chol Hamoed there, because we're looking forward that we should have the korbanot back, the offerings back of Chol Hamoed, with the building of with the avodah back, with the service back. We're looking for Rosh Chodesh, the korbanot of Rosh Chodesh to be back at that time. and we'll bring the offerings of the day. So therefore, that's why it's everything. Everyone has to remember. There's no such thing as by chance it's in that place. If it's placed, the Alaviyava was placed in the bracha of Ritzeh, which is called the bracha of Avodah, because of this. Rashi says because we're looking for having the offerings back of the offerings of that day. Therefore, it belongs in that bracha. The imlo omar. And here the Gemara says, if you do not say the Yalav Yavo, Marzirin Oto, you have to go back and repeat the Amidah. So
why? Like, why do you have to? Like, meaning, like, why is that? Why does not saying Hashem name vain supersede saying it?
So very good. It's not called in vain if I didn't do it right. If I have to do it again, meaning if there was a basic element ingredient that needs to be, if I have to talk about the day, and here the Gemara says I need to talk about Chalamo. I got to talk today's Chalamo, and I got to talk today's B'yom Chag HaMatzot Hazeh, B'yom Chag HaSukkot. I have to talk about the day in Yalav Yavo. On Rosh Chodesh, I have to talk about it. So if I didn't do it, so I there's something there's a very something big missing here in the davening, and it has you got to redo it. So it's not called in vain. It's called in vain when I don't need to do something and I do it. That's called in vain. But if I didn't do what if something was a basic thing that I was missing, and therefore it's not like I got to do it again.
More so that.
Sean, is that clear?
I mean, I just have a question on that, but yeah.
Yeah.
No, I mean, so like, I guess like if we say the regular pizza Amidah and it's on Moed or another festival or something, is it that like we don't have the proper kavana, we're not understanding like our place in time, and therefore we have failed to like discharge our obligation to recognize like the holiness of time, and therefore because we didn't have that kavana that we had to, that's why we have to go back, and it's not like the first prayer. Obviously, maybe like we were into it, we were thinking about the words, but failure where we were having that failure. So it's not necessarily a bracha levatala. It's just that we still have an obligation that has been we failed to meet it.
I wouldn't call it lack of kavanah, lack of intent. I just think the point is that you need to recognize the day. I mean, when you're praying, and the day is a day like Rosh Chodesh. Again, we said at night you won't have to repeat, but Shachrit Mincha, you need to talk about the day. You can't just make believe today is an ordinary day. Adam, is that clear? And if you didn't mention the day, you can have the greatest kavanah in the Amidah. You can be in the high heavens, and you follow the Shulchan Aruch, that you deleted all your thoughts, all the things that are on your mind, all the things all your work responsibilities and other responsibilities you have, right? That's before you daven. That's what soul does every day, right? You remove all things on your mind. And you're having beautiful kavanah. You're thinking about God the whole Amidah. You're not thinking about the sports and everything else that people think about. But you forgot to mention Rosh Chodesh. You forgot to mention that today is Chalamoid Sukkot. You didn't mention it. So there's an ingredient that was missing here in the davening. There's a hole in the davening. So that seems to be the issue. You hear what I'm saying? Yes.
There's, I learned that some degree, or in some specific case, if you said the Amidah and you forgot to say something, let's say it's Al-Hamid.
So you don't have to repeat that now.
Right, why not?
Oh, very good. So based on Al Gemara, because first of all, in Al Gemara, it seems that there is no obligation to say Al Anisa. It is something you have a right to do, based on what Al Gemara.
Is there other stuff outside of Miksim? Meaning, like I thought that in general, if we forget to say something in the Amidah, you don't necessarily go back and say it because today or maybe be today or just in general, people will forget even the second time. I remember that being, even the second time they may forget, and you really like, hate yourself.
So what Saul is talking about, also I want to say one more point. It could be also the fact that it's a Rabbanan Saul. You know what I'm saying? It might also play the role that, that's part of because it's the Rabbanan, the rabbis didn't require us to go back, perhaps.
Yeah, they not right.
I mean, right, the holiday of Hanukkah is the Rabbanan, but the holiday of Rosh Chodesh is right there.
Right.
What you're saying, Saul, is we find that halacha if I daven Amidah, it says if you didn't have kavanah in the first bracha of the Amidah, I wasn't thinking about what I was saying, I have to repeat the Amidah. But there is this thing where Saul is saying that today's day and age, we're afraid that you're going to repeat it, you're not going to have kavanah a second time. You're going to tell the person, good morning, Gary, repeat the Amidah, but we're afraid that he's not going to have intent the second time. That's where the halacha is found. Again, there's more details on halacha. You can look at the Yalkut Yosef, but but we don't, to my knowledge, we don't say that by other things. For instance, let's say a person forgot to say Baruch Aleinu during the time we're supposed to say Baruch Aleinu, right? So you have to. You didn't say. You didn't answer. You didn't say V'sein Talamat Levracha. You didn't do that insert. You have to repeat. Well, let's say Yalav Yavon Rosh Chodesh. We don't say that law doesn't apply anymore. The law of if I forgot Yalav Yavon Rosh Chodesh Shachrit and Mincha, I don't have to repeat the Amidah. That law still applies.
So why not? So for example, like, or I understand. So therefore, you wouldn't go back, right? But let's say, for example, you ate a meal, a lunch, you had bread or whatever, and you totally forgot to say regat mazon while you were sitting at the table.
Yeah.
And you're on a trip or something, and you go on the bus, you're not going back to the table. There's no way, you know what I mean? So I would think, from what I know, you still say it within the 72 minutes
Correct.
or so.
Correct.
So, but by that logic, like, why would we require ourselves to literally repeat the Amidah if we could, in theory, just say Yaleh Diabo after that? Why does it have to be in the Amidah, Yaleh Diabo? That's what I'm trying to say. Like, why can't we just say that?
Right. So obviously, which we have to say that Yaleh Diabo is a prayer. It's a very specific prayer that you're asking for something. That Yaleh Diabo, we should go up and we should come to Yerushalayim, to the Beit HaMikdash. We should bring offerings. And that's a prayer that needs to be said between you when you are praying that close. Like when you stand in front of Amidah, when you say the Shemon Esrei, it's a different saying Shemon Esrei. The Amidah is different than me just praying right now. I mean, if I pray right now, if I give a prayer, I offer a prayer. It's not the same. It's a different type of prayer when you're when you're doing an Amidah. It's a much more higher level prayer, the Amidah. So the Amidah. So therefore, the context. If I say Yaleh V'Yavo as part of if you pray for something as part of the Amidah, it's much stronger. It's a much more higher level prayer. That when you make a request before you say the second Hila Ratzon, before you take the 3 steps back, when you make a request in the Amidah, I would say it's a much stronger request than just saying it not in the context of Amidah. And therefore, if you didn't say Yaleh V'Yavo in the Amidah, which is so that is the power of that tefillah needs to be done. That's where it needs to be said.
Why that logic? Like, why would zone be that they literally don't say it, or you basically have to go back to that table no matter what, or you literally don't say it? Like, why would we even say?
Why would it must be different?
Yeah, so like I said, the scenario is like you're on a flash trip or something. You have lunch at the park, and you have bread there or whatever, and then you're on the bus back. They're not bringing the bus back to an hour just to bring 30 minutes to have you say forgot mazon, right? So
right.
So that means that you're allowed to say Birkat Hamazon after the fact. So if Birkat Hamazon is deraita, yeah, Levi Avo is deraita. Why, if you've already gone through the Amidah, I would think like, yeah, look, it's absolutely not ideal to say yeah, Levi Avo outside of the Amidah, but that's just the situation you're in. I'm just saying I'm surprised that we would have to repeat the entire Amidah for that one section, as opposed to just saying like, yes, it's not ideal, but I'll say I'll say the section outside of Amidah, like afterwards or something.
But we made a distinction between Birkat Hamazon and Amidah. We made a distinction. What was the distinction that we said? Amidah is something, right, Gary, that we have to do every day. We got to pray.
I think the answer to this question is that that's the entire cut. That has to be said. The is different.
Right.
When you're saying I skipped the entire Kata Mazon, fine, say Kata Mazon. We're not saying you didn't put in, let's say from the Shabbat, but you didn't hang out there, you're all inside the entire.
Right.
So in that case, yes, say it, except go left, the paper, see, there's two different scenarios.
I 100% agree with you. My only question is like even further, if I was to push even harder, I'd say like, well, why do we have to say any like again, like in terms of the structure and Amidah, which the Rabbanim created, like we never had Amidah beforehand, right? At some point we created like it was. I'm not saying that's not holy. I'm just saying it was at some point it's set together. Right. So beforehand, like we, huh?
18, then we added one later on, maybe 19.
So why should any Berachah have to, like, again, it's absolutely not ideal. I 100%
Amidah is a certain act of prayer. It's not like you're saying, okay, like anything else. You're actually standing in front of Hashem. Hashem is looking at it. In fact, I think you heard things like you're saying like Isha. If you're actually finished the Amidah, a lot of people when they turn right instead of left. Turn right was actually that's the Hashem's facing you. That's his left hand. You already finished the Amidah. When you're in the Amidah, you're facing Hashem. You go to the left. They said that's Hashem's right hand. So what we're trying to say is that you're in front of Hashem during Amidah. So you need to insert at a certain point.
But I want to add to Gary. Amidah is something we have to do. We have to daven every day. Birkat Hamazon is something I brought myself into it.
You still have to.
I have to do it once. I have to do Birkat Hamazon once I ate the bread. I have to do Birkat Hamazon. But Rosh Chodesh, I don't have to technically eat bread. It's a nice thing to do. You know what I'm saying? So therefore, if I didn't say Ya'aleh V'Yavo on Rosh Chodesh, I don't have to repeat the Birkat Hamazon. But let's say if I didn't say V'tzei on Shabbat, the first two meals, the halach is that for Ashkenaz and I would think for the Sfardim the same thing. You have to repeat the Birkat Hamazon. If you didn't say the first two meals, because you have an obligation to eat on Shabbat, Friday night bread. You have an obligation Friday Shabbat day to have bread, and yes, you're supposed to have bread Suda Shlishit. But if it's very difficult, you have no room. You could fulfill the obligation with using something else, even though you should be smart to have enough room to have bread later on for Suda Shlishit. So therefore, you don't have to repeat the Birkat Hamazon if you didn't say Ritzei on Suda Shlishit. But the other meals, since you're obligated to do these meals, you have to bring yourself into Birkat Hamazon. If you didn't say it, you got to repeat. However, but Rosh Chodesh, if I didn't say it, or Alanisim in Birkat Hamazon, I don't have to wash on Hanukkah, and therefore that also could play a role. But davening, I must daven. I must say the Amidah.
So first of all, what you said, I find it very interesting that that the structure is so required to be said at once. So again, I'm not against it. I love saying Amitabh. I'm just saying like to
Appreciate that.
yeah, like the fact that once you start, it's as if you have to complete it every, each and every stage.
It's all one unit,
Right.
all-
Yeah, exactly. You can't just like take it
Stop in
piece
the
out and
middle.
say it later or whatever. But I'm surprised that's the case. Meaning, in theory, you could pray to Hashem anywhere, every time, every place.
Because it's special. Done. You pray in front of Hashem. It's a certain type of prayer in front of Hashem, and this is the way you got to do it.
But my point is that if it's so, I guess what I'm trying to say is that if it's an enactment, like I would have thought that saying Hashem's name twice for all the other verachot would supersede the, in theory, enactment of the Amidah as a whole, which is prayer, but at the same time, it's, I would think, not at the same exact level as literally having Hashem's name just repeated over and over.
Right. Okay, good. Well, so we see the importance of how the way the prayer has to be done with the right ingredients. How important we should get our proper prayer in. Okay, and with that being said, we should get upstairs to do a proper prayer upstairs. Have a great day, everybody. Johnny, Asaf, have a great day.
Thank you, Rabbi. You too. Thank you so much for teaching us.
Thank you. Thank you so. We need you more often.
Yeah.